Listen to part of a talk in a geology class. Today we are going to cover the materials found in Chapter 6 in your textbook. I hope you read the chapter before coming to the class this morning. As your textbook stated, the word erosion usually refers to the surface of the earth. There are several types of erosion which occur naturally on the earth. Among them, wind erosion is most noticeable in desert areas. Wind erosion carries away light objects such as pebbles. These objects come in contact with various landforms and therefore slowly erode materials from them. Much more visible are sand dunes caused by the wind. Initially, sand may build up against the surface of a small rock. In desert areas, wind may blow in any direction, even sloping upwards. Sand builds on top of more sand slowly and creates a sand dune. With little rain or soil in these places, wind frequently blows sand around in many directions. These common events are also called dust storms. Can anyone give an example of places affected by dust storms?
Yes, Professor. I read that East Asian countries like China, Korea, and Japan are affected by dust storms annually.
That's indeed true. Yellow dust storms are a seasonal meteorological occurrence which affects much of East Asia periodically during the springtime months. The dust storms initiate in the deserts of Mongolia and northern China, where high-speed surface winds and strong dust storms kick up dense clouds of fine, dry soil particles. These clouds are then moved eastward by prevailing winds and affect the air quality in China, North and South Korea, and Japan, as well as parts of Siberia. Sometimes these dust particles are carried much further and reach the west coast of the United States.
I also read that these storms are causing havoc in those countries.
Unfortunately, the annual yellow dust storms are becoming more than annoyances for people. In the last 10 years or so, yellow dust storms have become a serious problem due to the increase in industrial pollutants contained in the dust and intensified desertification in China, causing longer and more frequent occurrences. They are blamed for causing numerous deaths and billions of dollars worth of damage in this part of the world every year.
Professor, didn't the U.S. go through a similar experience a long time ago? I remember from my high school English class that John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath was about severe dust storms in an area called the Dust Bowl.
You're quite right. In 1930s, during the Dust Bowl period, terrible dust storms caused huge ecological and agricultural damage to the Great Plains.
Why did it happen, Professor?
It was an unfortunate combination of natural and man-made consequences. Basically, those people who settled in the Great Plains didn't realize that the land was unsuitable for the European style of agriculture. Farmers in the Great Plains abused the land, and to make the matters worse, the area experienced severe drought conditions during this period, resulting in extreme erosion. In other words, the Dust Bowl was caused by severe drought coupled with decades of extensive farming without crop rotation. Continuous plowing of the pristine topsoil of the Great Plains had killed the natural grasses that normally kept the soil in place and trapped moisture even during periods of drought and high winds. Hence, with no natural anchors to keep the soil in place, it dried up, turned to dust, and blew away eastward and southward in large dark clouds. At the height of the dust storms, the clouds darkened the sky, reaching all the way to the eastern cities like New York and Washington, D.C. Much of the soil ended up dumped in the Atlantic Ocean, carried by prevailing winds. And what makes matters worse is that these winds were in part created by the dry and bare soil conditions, starting a devastating cycle which lasted almost a decade in some areas. These enormous dust storms were known as black blizzards or black rollers. They frequently reduced visibility to a few feet. All in all, the Dust Bowl enveloped 100 million acres of land from New Mexico to Kansas. Regrettably, these accelerated erosion events, like the Dust Bowl and yellow dust storms, are in part results of human activities. Examples of these activities which erode the resources of Earth include construction, logging, farming, and mining. Unfortunately, these activities are essential in maintaining our modern way of life, which means that they will not stop occurring anytime soon.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
12. What is the talk mainly about? 13. Why does the professor mention desert areas in the beginning of the talk? 14.
Listen again to part of the talk, then answer the question.
I also read that these storms are causing havoc in those countries.
Unfortunately, the annual yellow dust storms are becoming more than annoyances for people. What does the professor imply when he says this? Unfortunately, the annual yellow dust storms are becoming more than annoyances for people. (15) According to the professor, what are the reasons for the Dust Bowl in the 1930s? 16. Indicate whether each characterization below describes yellow dust storms or the Dust Bowl. 17.
Listen again to part of the talk, then answer the question.
What does the professor imply when he says this? Regrettably, these accelerated erosion events, like the Dust Bowl and yellow dust storms, are in part results of human activities.